candidates. We were invited by the Vietnamese to come in 1972 to see what it was like, the bombing that was going on. That's when Nixon resumed his bombing of Hanoi in North Vietnam, and we were actually under the bombs. And we came back and we pointed out that they were actually bombing civilian targets as well, and we had photos and so forth. And I think we contributed to accelerating the process of ending the war in the sense of we strengthened, I think, the feeling for peace in the country as a result. But that was the first time, and then I hadn't been back there since then, and that was my first trip back in this year. So it was very exciting to go back, because when I was there, they were on a war footing, and things were rather austere. And to come back now and see what's going on, it's really amazing.
And what can you tell us about the process, the idea behind having these conventions, what their purpose is?
Well, the Communist Party of Vietnam, this was their 8th convention.
Okay.
People should know they were called the Workers' Party up until 1976. After the war, they held their Congress, which I think was the 4th Congress, and then they changed their name to the Communist Party of Vietnam. And so this is the 8th Congress. It's a continuation of the Workers' Party and so on, and goes all the way back to the Indo-Chinese Communist Party, which Ho Chi Minh was the founder of back in the 30s. But to get back to what's going on, the Communist Party is constitutionally mandated to have conventions and to discuss its work and to make plans for the future of what it's going to do. And this was a very important Congress, because Vietnam is now going through a very dynamic economic and social change, and which has been interpreted in the West, misinterpreted in the West, I think, as a turn away from their socialist foundation, when actually they are actually seeking I think a rather creative way of building up the standard of living of the people and modernizing their economy while maintaining the socialist foundation in the system. So I found that the Congress was full of very vigorous discussions on this change, which they call doi moi, and much debate and many discussion of problems associated with it.
And where was the convention held?
It was held in the main square. I forget the name of the auditorium, in the middle of Hanoi.
And how long does it last?
The convention lasts from June 28th to July the 1st, so it's just a 3-day proposition.
And
no,
how?
Actually, 3 days, 4 days.
Okay. How many people were there?
Well, the actual number of delegates, I think it was about 1,100 and some delegates who were elected from local party organizations, regional party organizations, and there were about I think 100 or so international guests representing 40 different entities, parties, nations, and so on, including Li Ping, who's the Prime Minister of China, was there, and but as well other heads of state from the region were there, and then there were about 30 or so communist parties represented from around the world, including from Eastern Europe, the renewed communist parties there, and the U.S. party, of course, Japan, and Germany, PDS from Germany. There were some social democratic parties there as well. The Swedish Social Democrats were there. So it was quite an interesting mix of people, all of whom have a high sense of regard and solidarity with Vietnam, because it played such a big role in all of our lives. That war that ran for 11 years of brutality, really, that all of us had been a part of trying to bring to an end. And so coming to Vietnam was like coming home to family, and we were treated very, 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 very decent and with a lot of respect, and the people were very warm and so on.
What kind of provisions did they have for translation so that the guests could keep up with the conversations?
Oh, well, everything was simultaneously translated into, I think it was about 8 different languages.
So you just plugged into headphones?
Plugged in the headphone, turned the channel for your language, and you heard everything.
Sounds just like the UN.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And the translation, the English translation was superb. I thought it was superb. Now, everybody who spoke I spoke before the Congress to extend my greetings from my party, and I gave them the text before, and so the translator wasn't exactly wasn't a surprise. It wasn't spontaneous in that sense, and I read the speech. But I found all the English translation was fine. I kept up with the whole meeting.
And what was your reception?
Well, my reception was was really outstanding. I thought they were very kind and very warm, and our party has always had a certain how should I say, there's a certain affection among the Vietnamese people for our party because we never wavered on ending the war, and because we were consistently spoke out against the war, we felt it was not in the interest of the American people, and we articulated why, and it was not in the interest, and all the money that went down the drain. So I talked about that. I talked about all the money went down the drain, and the cities went into crisis during that period of time. The cities really have never come out of crisis as a result. And the extensive loss of life, the 55,000 Americans who died, who, by the way, I mentioned that it doesn't match what the Vietnamese cost of life were, which was 1 million people, 1 million dead and 2 million disabled and wounded. And but I said that our people mutually benefited from the end of this war, and were mutually victims of it, including the soldiers who didn't make the policy but were forced to carry it out. And I said now we should have normal relations, peaceful relations. It's time now to look at the whole global community and see how we can all together advance the cause of peace and disarmament, get rid of nuclear weapons, get rid of all weapons of mass destruction, and establish normal relations, peaceful relations between nations all around the world. Well, they responded very, very positively to all of that, and it was on TV and it went around. It was on the cable station there that in that region of the world, and it went all over India, all over Southeast Asia, and parts of China, I'm sure. And then I was interviewed on the media, mostly Western media, and they were asking me, some pretty sharp questions, which I tried my best to answer. They were interested in democracy in Vietnam, whether there was any, and so forth, and whether I was opposed to the joint ventures of foreign corporations coming in and opening up shop in Vietnam, which is their program.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we'll come back to that. How long were you there? Did you come in a little early or stay late?
Yeah, I came in a little earlier. Fortunately, I came in earlier because it's a very, very long trip. I went from New York to Frankfurt, Germany, and then that's about 7-8 hours, and then 13 hours from Frankfurt to Singapore, and then a long wait down there, and finally 3-hour, I think, 2 or 3 hour flight up to Hanoi from Singapore. So it was very tiring, and then, of course, I left on Saturday. I didn't arrive there till Monday, so I lost Sunday because of the time change. It went over so many time zones. And I was really tired, but I got there on Monday, and the thing didn't start till Thursday, so I had 4 days to rest. So they took me down to Hai Long Bay, which is about 70 kilometers from Hanoi, the resort area, and I went down there for a day or so and did some rest, talked to party people, and went around and saw some of their facilities, and it was very nice, very pleasant.
What was...
And then I stayed after the Congress for a couple of days, went down to Ho Chi Minh City, which was interesting, and spent a day or so down there, then headed home.
And what was the reaction of local people to visitors?
Well, they're not unfamiliar with Americans, and you should know that they've now changed. Their second official language is now English, not French anymore.
Oh, I
Interesting.
know.
So a lot of people do speak English, a lot of young people, and they have a very, I would say, warm culture. The Vietnamese people are very friendly, and what is interesting is that there's no animosity towards foreigners, no Americans coming in here. A lot of Americans come in here as tourists. I think there are a lot of Vietnam vets who come there and travel the country, and they sort of come back home or something to see where they were in that horrible time, and now they want to come back in peace. They bring their family, bring their kids, and some of them leave little mementos in the museums from their war, like their flak jackets and stuff. I don't know, some kind of some kind of symbol of friendship or something, and so they treat you very well, very well. And of course, U.S. corporations, about 250 of them, I understand, who have lined up to get licensed to do business in Vietnam, so they're interested in coming in.
And I understand that is a trend, and I think you were mentioning earlier, that is somewhat controversial, at least out in the rest of the world. Is the principle of foreign investment controversial in the party?
Yeah, there's a lot of debate about it. The principle of itself, the whole idea of joint ventures, which is a little different than just straight up foreign investment. In other words, the old colonial thing where a big country, powerful country with a big military, their corporations go in and basically, decide the whole rules and everything, and establish companies to rape the natural resources, take all the money they can out, and leave very little behind except exploited and impoverished people. That's been the long colonial tradition. And for those Americans who don't understand that, hey, we were a colony once too, and that's why we had a revolution. But the main thing that's happening that they're proposing is not that, but what they call joint ventures. And they are wide open to welcome corporations, but they have to come in terms that they have to form their company there with a Vietnamese partner. And actually, the Vietnamese socialist government, which is the kind of system they have, their social system, has set up capitalist, government-owned capitalist enterprises. It's interesting. Who then, in turn, form partnership with the foreign company, and they give that foreign company a 30-year lease. And they have to meet Vietnamese labor standards and so forth in order to function. And in the Vietnamese set-up corporation that's a partner with them, and some are 40-60 with the Vietnamese favor, some are 50-50, I understand, with equal share. And the Vietnamese get the share of the profit from that corporation, which they then put into their social fund. But they get something else. They get jobs for their people, and Vietnam has had a difficult time in the post-war period, especially during the mid-'80s, where they had a serious economic crisis. 2 million people were inadequately fed, some starving, and mass unemployment, had inflation rate near 800%. So the way they fought their way out of that was through these kind of proposals, this program. So that's the deal. So, for example, Ford Motor Company wants to go into this one province, and they want to build a car factory to make what they call a working man's car. That'll cost about $5,000 with a truck variation of it. And they want a 30-year lease, and they want to build this thing, and they're going to employ thousands of Vietnamese, bring the technology in, and the Vietnamese government, in turn, will set up a company to be in partnership with them and gain the jobs, gain the technology, but also that corporation has to meet their labor standards. Union workers have a right to have unions. They have wage standards and so forth. And the Vietnamese can raise the standard of living of their people, and they feel it's a positive. But there are some problems, serious problems associated with all of this. And that's what was discussed at the Congress. And I thought the Congress was so good because they were very frank in discussing some of these problems, like the greed revolution that comes along with all this money that can be made. And they have now a Vietnamese capitalist class. They've always had one. They had one during the war, a class that largely sided with the liberation forces, by the way. But they now have, people making a lot of money, a class of people making a lot of money, and it's creating, it would naturally create some social and political problems. And they talk very frankly about problems that they hadn't had before in the old days. And when they're talking about problems of corruption, bribery, the manufacture of false goods, and people who are cheating, and people who are taking advantage of their fellow citizens, exploiting them in ways that are not acceptable. And they even said that some of this is seeping into the Communist Party. And they were very critical of it. And they passed a rule, actually the last Congress, not this one, that, and it's a safeguard, they feel, that no member of the Communist Party can be an owner of a factory or in some way, in any way, collect any profit from exploiting other Vietnamese. They can work freely and vigorously in other parts of the economy, but they can't be on the profit-taking end and be a member of the party. And they made that rule for a reason, because I think they feared that if the members of the party gained a foothold in this capitalist sector of the economy, they will then in turn start making political proposals to reshape the economy to favor that. And that's what they don't want. They want to keep their socialist foundation in the economy. They see this as a transition to an advanced industrial but socialist economy. And the figures show that they're making real progress. They have an 8% growth rate, and in the industrial sector, it's a 12% annual growth rate. And you can see on the streets, enterprise and, buying and selling is very, very vigorous. New corporations are opening up all the time, and it's quite something.
Would inexpensive cars, or at least relatively inexpensive cars, be manufactured for domestic consumption or for an export market?
70% exported.
70?
That's the deal. 70% exported.
And how would you compare the model that the Vietnamese are using for the joint ventures with the model that the Cubans are using?
Well, the Cubans. I thought you were going to ask me about China, because the Cubans seem to be following similar to the Vietnamese. They were there at the Congress, and by the way, warmly received, really beautifully. And the Vietnamese, of course, have spoke out very vigorously against the Helms-Burton bill and all the other anti-Cuban bills. They've done everything they can to add their voice in the international, arena to try to eliminate those things. But they do a very vigorous trade with Cuba themselves. But the Cubans told me they are very much interested in what the Vietnamese model is, because they like the results, and it's less corrupting, they feel. Now, the Cubans, I understand, had originally said no foreign company can own any land, and I had heard recently that some foreign companies who have started tourist facilities there have actually been given access to the land. But I don't know if that's really true or not, but I heard that was true. Well, in Vietnam, basically those companies cannot own any land. They can only lease the land and lease the right to be in their country for 30 years. And I think the Cubans are interested in that. And the Cubans have done some joint ventures in the past, even on the worst days of the sort of Cold War against them. But the embargo recently has scared some companies away. But now they're fighting internationally, and they're asking the United States, demanding really that the Helms-Burton blackmail really be ended, and so they can have normal relations with them. So they like that. And I'll tell you another little interesting thing that's going on, and that is that they've discovered quite a good deposit of oil in South Vietnam, and enough to be exported. And there is some joint ventures going on with the oil, although the oil is fundamentally owned by the Vietnamese. They keep that in the socialist sector. All energy is kept in the socialist sector. And, of course, oil is vital to the Cuban economy, and since they were cut off, and that's part of why they're in the economic fix they're in. And so they're now talking to the Vietnamese about finding a way to get oil from Vietnam. And in the old days when the Soviets would send them oil, they stopped shipping oil directly from the Soviet Union. They had a deal with Venezuela that they would serve as Venezuela's European partners, buy purchases of their oil, and then the Venezuelans would take that same quantity of oil and bring it to Cuba. So they're looking at how to do something like that with Vietnam, which would be wonderful, because that could get the Cuban economy moving much faster than it is today, and overcoming what they call the special period and the economic difficulties that they're facing. So the Cubans are looking very carefully, and they're very, very positive towards the Vietnamese model.
I understood that the Cuban model was usually shorter.
Rather than 30 years?
More like 5, yes.
Yeah, it probably is.
And why have the Vietnamese set up a different way of doing it?
Well, when you talk about heavy industry,
okay,
for example, auto and steel production. But I want to say something about the auto, and I'll get back to the 30 years. To buy a Toyota in Vietnam now, for whatever reason, they told me a brand new Toyota costs like $50,000, and which that's not what a Toyota. I haven't bought a new car in many years, but I don't think a Toyota costs that much here. But that's what they have. That's what they have to pay to get one there. So this Ford plan and other plans that are going to come in are going to make it possible for them to be able to purchase autos at a much cheaper rate. And I don't think they're going to go full blown into a private auto kind of type of economy, but they do have serious transportation problems in Vietnam, and they really need help in every way. Now, 30 years. If you're going to build an auto factory, you can't really come in 5 years. I mean, it takes you 5 years to get the darn thing running. The same goes, I went to a place that makes television tubes. It's a South Korean, Vietnamese joint venture, and it's a beautiful, modern factory that produces over 1 million television tubes a year, employs about 1,600 people, I think. And I walked through the place. It's spotless, as such electronic companies have to be, but it has tennis courts and daycare center, beautiful cafeteria for people, right in the city of Hanoi, in a beautiful sort of industrial park, quite nice. Well, I talked to the manager there, and he said that they're happy with her. They need 30 years to even make their investment worthwhile. And he said they're very happy with the Vietnamese workforce, who he said are educated, and that's one of the things about socialism in wherever it is in the world. It educates its people, and free education is a byproduct of socialism, and therefore these companies feel they have access to a lot of educated people who are going to be able to learn high-tech concepts and learn technology and so forth. And so he said they were very happy with it, and he said in 2 years they expect this company to be on the level of a South Korean company in terms of its productivity and skill of workforce. And also the Vietnamese government has a healthcare system, which you have to pay a nominal fee for, but it's virtually free. Next to what we have here, it's virtually almost free. And so you tend to have a healthy workforce. You don't. It becomes part of the package. A corporation doesn't have to invest huge amounts of money in setting up privately run, healthcare systems and so forth. It's rather advantageous for them to use the socialist benefits, so to speak, to make their profit rates higher. But they need 30 years, they say, to get in there and to do what they want to do. Now, I asked the guy an interesting question. I thought, what happens when technology changes? Now, I just saw this thing in the paper this morning where they're moving towards a whole new technology in TV, computer. Don't ask me what it's all about, but it was on the front page of the Times this morning, all about this agreement that Clinton made, and they're going to change all the technology, the high-resolution television and all this stuff, and it's quite a thing. So I asked him, what happens when this level of technology is passed? Are you going to pull out and leave this factory and leave all these people unemployed and so forth? He says, no. If we're there for 30 years, we intend to change the technology and to update the technology and make whatever the market calls for. So I thought that was interesting.
I should interrupt the conversation just briefly here to let listeners know, if they joined us late, that this is Hemispheres, and we're speaking with Jarvis Tyner, Vice Chair and Legislative and Political Action Director for the Communist Party USA. If you're interested in joining the conversation, please give us a call at 449-4885. If that happens to be long distance for you, you can reach us at 1-800-737-3030. Now, Jarvis, what happens at the end of 30 years? Is there the option of extending the agreement, or do all the assets revert to Vietnamese control?
Well, I asked them that. Apparently they have a right. Of course, they have a right to extend it, and or whatever. They also have a right to pull out. And but you see, even if they pull out and take their machines, by then you have a workforce that's capable of operating in a highly technological, industrial, whatever setting. And they still are ahead because they then can look towards their own industry development. Now, old technology is not always good, but in a socialist economy you have a lot more flexibility. And I think they can go a long way after the 30 years to keeping their economy going, creating jobs, and moving forward within the framework of socialism. Now, if they opt for capitalism, then they got a problem with old technology, which you see in Eastern Europe. As soon as they opt for capitalism, everything collapsed. They had a terrible crisis because the old technology of socialism didn't fit into the world capitalist market thing. And I think it's complicated for them, but the technology is theirs. Once they learn it, and once they've gotten it in their country, they can use it.
Now, it sounds like a real win-win situation. It's attracting foreign investors, and the profits, or at least part of them, are being contributed to the general welfare in Vietnam. And then there's the employment and the training that you've mentioned. What is the big criticism of this inside the party?
Well, that's what I'm saying. The big criticism of it inside the party is that along with this, along with capitalist economic system comes capitalist ideology. And although the Vietnamese people hold the Communist Party and socialism is precious to them, it really is, because it really has saved them from total destruction, total colonial domination throughout their history 100 times, from the French to the Americans, going all the way back to the Ming Dynasty, the Tang Dynasty, the Wang Dynasty. They've always had to fight against foreign invaders, and the party, when it came into the scene, just was the key, the catalytic agent that made it possible for them to survive. As well, every time they've had problems, like the war problems or economic problems, the party has always sort of led the way to find a way out. You have a lot of respect for the party out there. 2.3 million members of the party. Last 4 years alone, 30,000 people joined the Communist Party in Vietnam. Even though there's this rule you can't be in a party and be a capitalist, still workers are joining the party in great numbers. Even small business people, when you talk to them on the street, and some of them have been in business in Vietnam for their families for decades, years, generations, have respect for the Communist Party and respect it. But what happens with this, you take, for example, working in a joint venture enterprise, likely will bring you a higher income and a better life than working in some of the state sector enterprises, because of the high technology and because of just the general greater values that are created in those corporations, in those enterprises. So you're going to get people feeling, in some instances, that they want to change the whole system that way. And once you do that, then there goes the health care, there goes the housing program, there goes the education, free education, there goes the low price utilities, there goes the food programs, there goes all the other health, all the things that they need. And the ideological struggle they're facing, and this is what was coming up in the Congress, is it possible to set up a society where everyone can raise the standard of living for everyone, even though everybody's not equal, but raise the standard of living for everyone, and that that process is beneficial to everyone? Or should we set up a society which is very similar to other parts in Southeast Asia, which has beautiful edifices, beautiful buildings, the Taj Mahal kind of concept where we show tremendous wealth of the few, and the rest of the people don't have food, don't have health care, don't have housing, are suffering disease and all the horrid things that are so much a part of tradition, the oppressive conditions are there. So their people are fairly convinced that that's not what they want. But once you bring these corporations in and people get a taste of this tremendous consumer goods and so-called good life of the West that only a few can have, but that few would tend to push that way, then you have ideological problems that they have to deal with. And so this is the struggle that they're involved in. And I'll be honest with you, the outcome of the struggle is not decided fully. They are very confident they're going to come through this thing, but you can imagine the pressures that are going to be on Vietnam when they get full-blown into this system of doi moi. And there's a real... They expect the economy in Vietnam, for example, in the next 10 years to double. And therefore, they expect a lot of corporations to come in and so forth.
And that's a lot of change.
I feel like it's a struggle. But, if they can't win this struggle, then, my God, the fight for socialism in America is rather hopeless, because we face this in 100 times more, 1,000 times more pressure on these questions than they do. And I feel they'll survive, because I feel that the party and the government is in touch with the problems of the people and really doing their best to solve those problems and to stay close to the people.
Well, we have a caller here. Oscar, are you with us?
Yes, good evening, gentlemen. What a nice program you have. I just have a comment, two comments, in fact. I'd like to know what is your views, and in the light, if the Mr. the General Le Docteur were alive today, what he will say about the people in Vietnam inviting the satraps the American, though, of course. And then the other comments is, if you care to comment something about the visit of Fidel to the Vatican, and if you have any comments on that. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Well,
Jarvis?
I think in inviting the Americans tried to come in at the point of a bayonet, and terrible loss of life resulted, and terrible suffering. And the Vietnamese fought back, and they won. They're saying we have no problem with corporations coming in if they're going to sign an agreement and they're going to act like gentlemen and benefit our economy and be honest in whatever in their dealings. Now, they have already had to cancel some joint ventures because of corruption, dishonesty, thievery on the part of foreign corporations, not Americans. This is an Australian company I read about, but there have been other cases. And they've also had to step in and handle some problems of labor, exploiting of labor and violating Vietnamese labor laws. And there have also been strikes against some of these corporations by Vietnamese unions who have a right to strike, and they're not that right is guaranteed. So I think it's a struggle. It's a good old class struggle going on over there, and I think they're going to do it. And the comrades over there feel this way. You don't have any help from the socialist countries anymore. The Soviet Union's gone. And then, as I say, by the mid-'80s, they were in deep crisis, and Soviet aid was gone. The East Germans, they needed a hospital, they would build it for them. They needed medical supplies, they were given to them. They needed a hydroelectric power station. I saw a huge one that the Soviets had built for them. And but now that's gone, and they now must find a way to survive on their own. And what I like about what's happening is that really it's a very innovative way to be able to fight for your socialist principles even under the most difficult world situation. And that's what they're trying to do.
Did you find people invoking the name and memory of Ho Chi Minh to lobby their case?
No. No, as a matter of fact, they consider. See, Ho Chi Minh was always for relations and trade, and even just as Lenin was for U.S. and foreign investment in their country, but on their terms, not on the colonial terms, not on exploitive terms. They were for peaceful relations with other countries. He had an image of socialism that included normal, peaceful trade and other relations with other countries. That's not alien to socialism. So nobody could evoke Ho Chi Minh and say this was wrong. But they did say some interesting things. They said that, for example, and I really hope it works out, but North Korea's difficulties today are largely a result of the Juche concept, which is that we are alone and we will do it all by ourselves and we don't need any help from the outside. And, of course, that was never true. North Korea did get help from the outside all the time, but especially in the other socialist countries. But they always had this Juche thing, we'll do it on our own. And when they hit some economic problems and there was a natural disasters of flooding and stuff like that, and they couldn't solve it, they also hesitated for a long time to reach for help from the outside. The Vietnamese sent them foodstuffs, rice, other things to help them out. But, for example, they will not trade with South Korea. They will not trade with other countries. They had a very richest thing. Then all of a sudden, they realized it wasn't going anywhere, and they had to adjust. And so they adjusted by opening up this now. And they're talking about joint ventures and so on. So the Vietnamese said they didn't want to go down that path of rigidity. They had to be very creative in this very complex new world that you're dealing with. And they had to be very creative and be flexible in order to survive. And I think that's what they've done.
And the North Koreans are moving towards experiments with that model.
Yeah, but I hear that they're setting up a region where they're allowing unbridled capitalism. And I'm reading this from Western capitalist media sources. But if that's true, that's a little problematic when you just leave it wide open like that. But, they have a right to make their mistakes and to do what they feel is best for their people. But that might be moving in the wrong direction.
How long ago did the first joint venture open up in Vietnam?
I don't know the exact date, but Doi Moi started in the last Congress, which was 4 years before this. And there was even some sprinklings of it before that. So it's less than 10 years old.
So it is a very new concept.
Very new, very new. And when I was there in 72, it was an interesting thing when you saw flags and stuff representing the party and the government and hammers and sickles, very nice. Ho Chi Minh's picture was everywhere. This time I get off the plane, and you still have that, but now you have, Pepsi Cola, Coca-Cola, Panasonic, Gold Star, Toyota, all these signs everywhere. And in fact, I saw an interesting thing. I saw a banner greeting the 8th Congress of the Communist Party with corporate sponsors on it. This is Vietnam today. It is really interesting, and I really wish them well. This is really interesting what they're trying to do.
We have another
Pepsi Cola sponsoring the Communist Party Congress. A banner welcoming them. It was interesting.
We have another caller here on. Greg, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Hello?
Hello, what can we do for you?
Okay, Jarvis, I have a couple of questions for you, and actually first I'd just like to say, I don't know, like it's great what you're doing, being a socialist and all, educating people. And so I have two questions, they're both sort of unrelated, and maybe I'll just leave you with them. The first one is I read something recently about the Pope that he had basically come out against the evils of capitalism and large transnational corporations, and had recognized the seeds of truth in communism and socialism. And I was wondering if you were familiar with this, and if this has had any impact, if this is it just seemed incredible to me, seeing as the Catholic Church was the original architect of manifest destiny. And the other question is if you could just talk a little bit about the Vietnamese political structure and what kind of safeguards they have to keep the political system for the people and not for whatever powers that may be, whether it be corporations or, as in the case of what happened in the Soviet Union, just politicians.
Okay, thanks for those questions.
You're welcome.
Well, first, thanks for the encouraging, the words of encouragement. Believe me, it's a uplifting life of struggle being a communist in the United States. But you do need encouragement. They put it that way, and I thank the caller for that. Well, I hadn't read anything from the Pope on the evils of transnational corporations and that the seeds of truth in communism. But some Catholics have drawn that conclusion. And you have the liberation theology, which is quite widespread, especially in Latin America, but other parts of the world as well among Catholics. And this is very commendable. And then usually the cardinals here usually issue, or the bishops, I believe, who usually issue their statements around poverty and so forth, which have always had a powerful impact. And I know some outstanding fighters against exploitation, poverty, and racism who are priests or nuns and devout Catholics, as well as other religions. But there's a new book out by Bernstein on the Catholic. I haven't read it yet, but I saw some reviews about it, about how this same Pope, who now wants to go to Cuba, worked very closely with the CIA in the whole overthrow of socialism in Eastern Europe. And I don't know if he's seeing a new side of things or what, but that's his history. And I just don't know exactly what his plans are for Cuba, but I think for the Cubans, and this was asked earlier, so I'll mention it, I think for the Cubans, having the Pope come there pretty much destroys the embargo business, because it does suggest that it is healthy, normal, and natural for anyone who wants to be able to travel to Cuba and without restrictions and visit the Cuban people and, in his case, practice one's religion with them. And so I think that's to the Cubans' advantage. On the other hand, if he intends to encourage a movement to destroy socialism in Cuba, that's going to be a struggle, because the Cuban people have fought, valiantly with their blood and everything to defend their socialist country. And the Cuban government, socialism, has overwhelming support among the people. Somebody told me once that maybe 10% of the population is opposed to the government, but I don't even know if it's that much. Every May Day, there's 1 million people in the square, and they're enthusiastic, and you can't get, in the Jose Marti Square in Havana, and you can't get people to pretend to be what they are, enthusiastic about socialism. And Fidel is extremely popular there, and I don't know if the Pope is more popular. I doubt it very, very much. So to me, I don't think he's going to be able to do that, but I have a feeling things will be tried. But that's part of the world today. You have to deal with it, and Cuban socialism cannot isolate itself anymore. They have to have trade with people around the world. They have to reach out, and I think that when people go to Cuba, which is a very important thing to do, people should do that. It's a very beautiful country and beautiful people. You'll see what they're trying to do down there with their health care, with their education, and so forth. And what meager things they have is far more democratically distributed to the people than you find in any capitalist country anywhere. And if they ever able to build their economy up and have normal relations with people in the world, they will also build a very beautiful socialism, I feel. And I guess they're moving towards something great now. And I think they feel this Pope is going to help them get there quicker.
I think that I also saw the stories that Greg was referring to in the local papers here, at least some wire stories. Maybe they were Knight Ridder stories. We have the local paper in Boulders and part of the Knight Ridder chain, and they were saying that the Pope, upon reflection now in 1996, looking at the post-Soviet world, was feeling that he had not necessarily done good because people were suffering as a result of some of the things that he did. So I would guess that Fidel knows that and is probably taking that as his beginning point and inviting the Pope.
Yeah, well, anybody who's honest would have to say that's what's going on in Eastern Europe is a mess as a result of this. I mean, there are some people getting rich, but, that's not hard to do under capitalism. That's what it does. But at the same time, there are masses of people who are in very, very dire straits economically, socially, and democratic rights have not gotten better. They've gotten worse. And so if he sees that and he honestly want to say that, thank God. That's what I say.
To get back to Greg's other question, what can you tell us about how the political system in Vietnam works?
Well, as much as I know, you go to a country for 10 years, 10 days, and you read a few books, and you become an expert, right?
Oh yeah.
Well, they have an elected government. They have a prime minister. They have a parliament. They have people run for office, and they are elected to office. They do not have. They have a single-party state, though. They do not allow. Well, there are other parties, but they will not allow a capitalist party to be formed, and that's the safeguard that they have. So, as one of the reporters asked me, hey, when I walked out, I think he was from Reuters or something. He said, "Look, how could you call this a free? There's no pluralism here." I said, these folks have been through hell fighting for their lives. They came out of the war in '75, and then they went into Cambodia to end the genocide of Pol Pot while the rest of the world was sitting around twiddling their thumbs. They went in and they stopped Pol Pot, ultimately defeated him. Then in 1979, the Chinese attacked them from the north, and they just signed an agreement with China in 1989 to end that. And they came out of Cambodia just before that. So they've only had 6 years of peace, and they've had a bitter experience with war and foreign capitalist corporate companies, rather countries coming into their country and trying to take it over. And they're not flexible on that point, and I can understand that fully. I said 20 years from now, who knows what they'll want to do. But right now, they're not talking about a capitalist party being developed. And I think they're correct, because I think their people need the experience of these corporations coming in. They need to understand what's going on there. And they need time to evaluate that situation and not run off and feel like they can set up some capitalist party or something like that. Not that there's a movement to do it. They say among their capitalist people, there's the people in the capitalist class, they're not moving to do that. But it's a natural thing for every class to form a political party. That's history. That's life. But they're not allowing it. That's one thing. The other thing is that they're keeping the they have there's a three-sector economy, they call it. See, the joint venture is not the only sector economy. There's the socialist sector, which is basic, and they are keeping all of the basic foundational economy in the socialist sector. Energy, as I said, oil, electrical power, steel production. They named some other basic things that they're keeping in the sector of the population because of the Doi Moi program. But there's a tremendous isolated rural area. There's like thick jungle with elephants and lions and stuff in Vietnam. that people don't think about, but that's there. And to reach those regions and the mountainous areas and so forth, it's so difficult, and they have trouble delivering service. So they were talking very frankly about what measures they were going to take, and they intend in the next period, before the next Congress, to pretty much wipe out those kind of social problems, health care delivery, hunger problems in some of the regions of the country. And they still have some national disaster problems from floods and other things that they've had to deal with that they haven't been able to solve. They said they're going to solve that. But the main thing is that they really intend to double their economy in the next 10 years. And they have a plan to do it. And they seem very confident they're going to do it, and the party is behind it 200% really. And that was what was discussed at the Congress as well.
I think Vietnam is still such a foreign country to Americans. It's just so far away, and of course Asian culture is very different than our Western culture. What can you tell people just from your observations or interactions with people, feelings of the place, about what Vietnam is like? How would you compare it to more familiar references we might have, maybe?
Well, it's an extremely lush tropical area. It's beautiful. I went to Hai Long Bay, this gorgeous place with this huge bay. I think it's 1,000 kilometers around, with 1,000 limestone rock sort of formations coming out of the water, and it's lovely mountains. People are extremely friendly. It's as lush as you want. It's everything that you kind of think of a tropical paradise in terms of its potential. The people seem like good old country people. Like my folks are from North Carolina, and sometimes I go down there and go to the real rural areas. People are very much the same. The food has a different taste when you're in a rural area. They kind of cook the chicken with a little bit of special spices and stuff, and you can sit down and talk to the people, and they laugh with you. And it's warm, and they drink a lot of beer, and they're very friendly and warm. The place has a lot of tropical look, and everybody's growing rice in their front yard. Now they have this crash program to provide. So everybody's working hard, and those beautiful water buffaloes everywhere. The children always ride them, take care of them. They get assigned a water buffalo, when they're small, and they have to take care of this water buffalo. Things weigh tons and tons, with the kids, just really tiny kids riding around with a stick and those wide hats. And then the women carry huge weights down the road on these things, crossbars across their back with the baskets on each side, and you see them moving rice and other goods and services down the road. Old people nobody's overweight, by the way. It's an interesting thing to see. Everybody seems, they consider us Americans huge. Like guys would come up to me. I'm 6'3.5", and I weigh over 200 pounds. So I feel like it was a giant or something there, And the people come up to you, and the guys I was working with used to always kid me. They come by and pat my belly, say, "Where'd you get that from?" Kind of stuff like that. They're really warm people. They're really quite friendly. They're into American culture a lot, especially young people. They like music. I had a little Motown tape, and I just put it on, and as we ride around from place to place, they just really got into it. They're really into it. But they get, they're very warm. So I found it was like going to the South in the 40s when I was a kid. My folks used to take me down there. I remember the little roads, 2-lane highways. That's what you have down there, And they need to do something about it because they have trouble moving their economy with 2-lane highways. But they want help with the infrastructure, and they want to build up their highways and so forth. But it's like going back to the country, being with people in the country. That's what it was like.
A lot of dirt roads.
Yeah, dirt roads.
Thatched huts.
Every time it rains, the rainy season, 3-something every afternoon, pours down rainy, and stops. But the roads get washed out, the bridges get washed out, big potholes that were created. They have real problems like that in some of the dirt roads. You go through little towns, I was in Jamaica recently. You drive down, you go through little towns. It's the same thing. Go through these little towns, and a lot of people standing around doing things, and then you go through a rural area, you come to the next little town. It's interesting.
Now, I've also heard that the Vietnamese have very little exposure to African people and African American people. How did you find their reaction that way?
Well, after the war, they don't feel that way too much. First of all, there are a lot of mixed kids there. You don't see them so much now because it's 25 years. They're now grown and have kids themselves. But I found it was fun. There are a couple every now and then somebody walk by and give you a real like strange look, like who is this guy? I'm African American, so they. But they've seen the soldiers. There's some African Americans who live there, by the way. I think they're not African Americans. They're African who live there. And maybe there's some soldiers who decide not to come home. I don't know, but I saw some on the street walking around in very much in Vietnamese attire and like they were part of the fabric of society. But no, it was fun. And you go to Hanoi, it's like going to New York or something. It's very cosmopolitan. And the same goes to Ho Chi Minh City, very cosmopolitan. And people have seen everybody, So it was a good atmosphere.
Well, I certainly appreciate your taking the time to chat with us here at Hemispheres. We've been speaking with Jarvis Tyner, Vice Chair and Legislative and Political Action Director for the Communist Party USA. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard, and anytime I'd be happy to come on, tell you some more of my adventures.
Well, I'd like you to stay on the phone for just a moment here while I sign off, and we'll get the next program going.
Okay, good.
This is KGNU Boulder, 88.5 FM. Coming up next, we have Corriente.